Welcome. So good to be with you on this Wednesday as we get together for a little midweek Bible study and devotional time. So glad you've taken some time out of your day, out of your week to join us to dive into God's word and hopefully be uplifted and encouraged and maybe even a little bit challenged by what he has to say to us. As some of you probably already know, I am a huge sports fan. If you don't already know, then I'm telling you, I am a huge sports fan. And if you follow sports at all, you probably know that rankings and polls are a huge part of sports, especially more specifically college sports. But there's always a list, of college football, college basketball, especially those two are the more followed college sports. But all of them have rankings and polls. But there's always a list of, somewhere somebody telling us who's number one, or at least who that certain person or that group of people thinks is number one. And being number one's a big deal, right? Obviously, winning it all is a big deal, but being number one helps your seeding, helps you throughout the season, garner ranking points that'll lead to a better seed as you get into tournament play and all of those things. And at the end of the day, obviously, being number one is vitally important, right? And teams put it on banners, and players talk about it. Fans obviously obsess over it and talk about it all the time. But everybody wants to know who belongs on top, and usually that gets settled in the field. But who's on top as far as the rankings go? There's a more important, though, ranking that all of us have in our lives, as important as those are to a lot of different people, sometimes way more important than they should be. But as important as those are, there's a much more important ranking that sits, that all of us have, as I said, in our lives. Whether we realize it or not, all of us have something that sits in the number one place, something that carries more weight than anything else, something that has the greatest influence over our decisions and our priorities and our emotions and the direction ultimately of our lives. Now, most of us, if you are a Christian, most of us know what the answer is supposed to be, right? If you're a Christian, somebody asks you, "Hey, what's number one in your life?" Of course, you know the right answer is God, right? God is. Jesus is. Of course, that's the right answer, right? But it's one thing to say that God is number one. It's another thing for him to actually sit in the number one spot on the throne of your life. Jesus once told a rather short story about a man who found this treasure hidden in a field, and he says in Matthew chapter 13 verse 44, when the man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold, get this, all he had, and bought that field. What I love about this story is that nobody had to convince the guy to make the treasure that he found number one. Nobody had to, pry everything else out of his hands. He wasn't miserable about what he gave up, even though it was everything he had, right? Jesus says that in his joy, he sold it all. Why? Because in the end, he found something better. He found something that was much more valuable than what had been number one in his life. And I think sometimes we get the Christian life backward. We think that putting God first is mainly about trying to push everything else down the list. And certainly God has to be number one, and that's part of how it works, right? We elevate God, and everything else falls out of number one. That's how it should be, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean like caring less about those things or wanting less of those things. Like give this up, let that go. Maybe the better way to see it is more that we put God in His rightful place, right? It's not that we're necessarily stripping everything else of its importance, but we're giving God what is due his importance and his place and his weight in our lives. Because when you find a treasure that's that valuable, the rankings begin to change, right? The things competing for first place don't necessarily become bad things or evil things. Like, there's still some good things out there, right? Family is a good thing. Success is a good thing. Relationships are good. Dreams are good, right? But the good things, as good as they are, make terrible gods. They were never meant to sit on the throne of your life. And the truth is, there's only one for room on the throne. There's no such thing as a throne pew, right? I've seen lots of different thrones and shapes and sizes, but the common denominator in all of them is that only one person sits on the throne. You see, the question isn't simply, do you believe in God? I hope you do. Nor is it even, is God part of your life? I hope he is. I hope he's more than that, right? Because really the question is, who's sitting on the throne of your life? Who's at the center? Who is at number one? What has the final word in your decisions? But what or who do you trust most for your security? What carries the most weight? Because whatever has the final word is probably what's really number one in your life, right? And God doesn't want to just be one of the many important things in your life. Like again, there's no throwing pews, but like we try to have that, right? Where we set them all up, and he doesn't want to just be one important part of many things in your life. He doesn't want to be somewhere near the top of the rankings, sharing space. He and he alone deserves the throne. But the good news is also that God's not asking us to give up the treasure for something less, right? He's inviting us to let go of those things that, even if they're good, they can never truly satisfy us, so that in turn we can discover what is real and what is truly valuable. The invitation of Jesus isn't simply give everything else up, it's also come and discover something better, something of true value and worth. And so, again, who's number one in your life? The college football rankings aside, who's number one in your life? And I don't just mean the answer you should give, not just in the ranking you should claim, but who actually sits on the throne of your life by the way that you live your life and who you give authority to. Because let me tell you, there's only room for one number one. Hope you have a blessed day. God bless.